Hi everyone, I'm Cheryl Mahoney and I blog at marveloustales.com. I post a lot about books and writing and sometimes the Phantom of the Opera, kind of a lot. But long before I ever met the Phantom of the Opera, I was also a Star Trek fan, and I'm still a Star Trek fan. Trekkie rather than Trekker would be my preferred designation. I can also pretty much out-geek anyone by saying that I wrote Star Trek fan fiction in high school. If you knew me on fanfiction.net as Tavia, hello, glad you're still out there. So fortunately I move in circles where it's a cool thing to try to out-geek each other, so I wear that badge with pride. I don't blog that much about Star Trek, but I thought today I would show you my Star Trek book collection. People think of Star Trek as being TV show or movies, but there's actually a lot of Star Trek books as well. I've watched all the TV shows. I'm a little behind on Discovery, but otherwise I've watched all of them. I've seen all the movies, even the ones that we pretend don't exist. Usually they had odd numbers. But I also really enjoy Star Trek books. Some of them. The quality varies. And I have a lot of them. The good ones, of course. So I'm going to turn the camera around and take you on a visit to my bookshelves to look at my Star Trek collection. Here is my Star Trek collection. As you can see, it's filling an entire shelf and then some. I might have to spill it onto a second shelf pretty soon, although right now stacking is still just making it work. So I have a few magazines and things over here. I think I've got something for the 25th anniversary and the 30th anniversary and the 35th anniversary, and there's been more recent than that, but there are a few things in there. The first ones you can really see a bit better though. Well, first of all, as you can see, I have a Kirk and Spock salt and pepper shaker, and then I had to also go and get McCoy because it's not quite right to just have two of them. Or as a good friend once said, some people think that Star Trek is about Kirk and Spock. Other people know that it's about Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. And I am certainly in that second category. So I have all three of them. I never use them for salt, pepper, or anything else, but they are on my shelf. So first up, I have some short story collections here. The top two there, The New Voyages, date back to the 1970s. I found them in a used bookstore and was quite excited about it. Strange New Worlds were being published when I was a kid, more or less, I guess maybe high school age. And that was interesting. They basically invited fans to submit stories, and it was actually a rule. You couldn't be a published author. I think like you could have published 2 or 3 short stories or something, and that was the maximum, and more than that you weren't eligible for the contest. And then they put together, I bought up to number 7 in the collection. I think they may have kept publishing a little bit longer than that. And it's all different eras of Star Trek. I mean, any of the TV shows, they have stories from all of them. It's a little bit odd. I have this huge stack of them, and probably half of the stories are good. Some are very, very good. Some I really actively dislike, and it baffled me always because it was all the same editors were choosing all of these different stories. But, you know, tastes vary. So I've had to keep all of them, even though probably half are good, but they're spread out throughout the different volumes. So there's that, and then a couple of slightly odd books. Legends of the Ferengi goes through the Ferengi rules of acquisitions with sort of some anecdotes, I guess, not stories, and then Q's Guide to the Continuum is somewhat the same. They're quite comical books, not stories, just information about Star Trek. So we move along, and this is another shelf that looks like there's no rhyme or reason to it, but that's because it makes sense in my head. So you will observe, if you know Star Trek insignia, I mostly have original series Star Trek books because that is my favorite. But there is a little bit of a rhyme and reason to the order. So I have a whole set of about 5 or 6 here, what I like to call Star Trek Lives books. So those were the very early novels. They tend to be shorter, you will notice. They're quite thin. And they were pre-movies, pre-Next Generation. There's a certain earnestness to them that I quite enjoy. And they also tend to really push the limits of doing things that would not have been possible in a 1-episode TV show because that was where it was, and they were sort of enjoying doing things that could not at the time been done on screen. They did not have CGI the way they do now, or else were very extended timelines that you couldn't do on a TV show. So those are kind of fun. I enjoy the flavor of those, even though they don't always add up with later things. A lot of things had not yet been established. So then the next two are my two very favorite Star Trek books. So they get sort of pride of place at the beginning here, more or less. First Frontier sounds crazy, and I'm going to acknowledge that. The premise is that there's a group of aliens who feel they never had the chance to rise to the supremacy they should have in the galaxy, and they blame humans and the Federation for that. They happen to be reptilian aliens. Maybe that's related. They decide to go back in time. They use the Guardian of Forever and stop the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs. And that way humans never evolve, the Federation never exists. Due to a wild fluke, and they pretty much acknowledge that. McCoy is like, the odds must be 1,000,000 to 1, and Spock goes, oh, much farther than that, and then, quotes them. The Enterprise somehow is the only thing that isn't affected, so they end up in this galaxy, alternate, well, no, it's their universe, but it's altered. It all gets very complicated. And they're the only ones who survived, trying to now deal with, well, wait, there is no Federation. There are no humans. They go back to Earth, and there's nothing there. It's just a wilderness. And the Klingons and the Romulans have basically just been pummeling each other for centuries, and will keep doing that until they all fall apart. Eventually, they end up going back in time to try to stop the aliens from stopping the dinosaurs from dying. And that's where it gets a little crazy, but it's done really, really well. If you can read the second author there, Dr. James I. Kirkland. I always thought that was kind of a funny name considering he's writing about James T. Kirk, but anyway. He's actually a paleontologist. He really knew what he was doing with this, and it shows. It treats the dinosaurs with respect. Nobody's like riding around on a T-Rex or anything ridiculous, and it's really handled seriously and very well done. And so that's one of my absolute favorites. And then Prime Directive by Judith and Garfield Reeves-Stevens is also excellent. It's one of these very long-spanning stories. Basically, the Enterprise went to a planet, and we learn this very early on because it's done a little bit out of order. And the planet was still under Prime Directive protection. Things went horribly awry. The aliens basically wiped themselves out almost entirely on their world. And the Federation feels that it's because Kirk and the Enterprise broke the Prime Directive. And so they pretty much all get kicked out of Starfleet. But they're convinced that what they think happened is not actually what happened. So the first part of the book is them trying to get back together and back to this planet. Middle part is a flashback to what happened when they were there and it all ended disastrously. And then the third part concludes with figuring out what actually happened there. What I love about this, it's a beautiful exploration of the characters. There's a lot of dramatic, emotional things going on for them. And there's a lot of really funny moments as well. It's a nice balance of drama and then humorous moments that I think Star Trek at its best also does that balance. So I tend to say that my favorite Star Trek captain is Shatner's Kirk. It used to just be Kirk, but now there's Pine and he's all right, but I like Shatner's Kirk better. However, I suspect that what I really mean is I like the Kirk from these two books. I mean, there's no slightly questionable acting with respect to William Shatner, and there's a lot of depth of character and who Kirk is in these, and all of the characters as well, but I mean, he's the captain. He tends to be a little bit primary. So really, really enjoy those, really recommend them. Moving along, a little bit of a glare there. So The Eugenics Wars is a very cool two-part book, and then To Reign in Hell is kind of the third part, even though it's got a different title. It looks at the rise and fall of Khan Noonien Singh all throughout the 80s, 90s. It tries to reconcile real history with Star Trek history, and does quite a nice job at it, actually, of how Khan could have supposedly ruled half the planet, and yet somehow we've never heard of him. It was all kind of shadowy and undercover, and you have to run with that a little bit, but he does a nice job. I'm also really impressed. Greg Cox is the author. He combines a lot of things from actual history and turns them into a Star Trek thing. You know, there was a nuclear meltdown at a plant, and that really happened, and They say it was an accident, but we know that it's actually because Gary Seven was trying to stop Khan from rising to power. That kind of thing. And it's really well done. And he actually walks through it all at the end and explains what was history and what was not. And other thriller authors who like to do that sort of thing, I could not name them, but I mean Dan Brown, should do that in their books. But that's a different rant. Anyway, then To Reign in Hell is what happened in between Khan's TV show and the Wrath of Khan movie, and that's also quite interesting. Star Trek Federation, you will notice it's Judith and Garfield Reeves-Stevens again. That one explores Zefram Cochrane's history. It actually goes between prior to Star Trek, I mean when Zefram Cochrane was first alive, to during Classic Trek, to then also Next Generation. There's some time travel things going on. And that one's quite good as well. It was a little unfortunate for those authors. The movie, First Contact, kind of disrupted both of their books because it changed the rules about both what covers the what the Prime Directive covers, rather, and also Zefram Cochrane's history, because their books are not in alignment with that. They wrote them before the movie. I actually like their version of Zefram Cochrane better. It's a lot more plausible. It's maybe a little bit less... I mean, it's pretty dramatic in its own way, but it's not the guy in the refugee camp inventing warp drive. It actually makes a lot more science sense, but that's my preference. So then there's a series of books that are all set during the first 5-year mission. Oh, I completely went right past my Tribble lurking up there. Used to have a Trill. The battery died a few years ago, unfortunately, but it just kind of lurks there. Unfortunately, has not multiplied so far. So, a series of books from the 5-year mission, and those are good as well. I actually used to have more Star Trek books. I cleared through them at some point, decided I'd only keep the best. One of my criteria was, do Spock and McCoy snipe at each other? If they do not, yeah, they didn't really get the characters right, did they? Probably not going to keep the book. So I can pretty much recommend all the ones that are on my shelf right now. Mud in Your Eye is particularly good, though. Harry Mudd comes back. Doctor's Orders is also quite good. McCoy complains one too many times, and Kirk is like, well, then you can be in command while I go on this totally routine landing party, and then, of course, he disappears, and McCoy is stuck in command for like the next 3 days. It's quite good. Really enjoyed that one as well. He does better than you might think in his own way. You will see there I have a nice Data action figure. That was from my very first job. I worked at KB Toys, and I bought a Data action figure as a souvenir. He's blocking a few books, though. Move aside, please, Commander. So let's see. The Kobayashi Maru is cool. The characters get together. It's actually movies era, but then they are reminiscing about how they each confronted the Kobayashi Maru. Another one that got devalued by a later movie, or contradicted is probably a better word. I, again, like how Kirk handled this one in the book better. Basically, he did introduce a bug into the program, but he convinced the Klingons that he was a famous Starfleet captain that they would not want to cross. And I'm like, that's amazing and so Kirk. And when the admirals are like, what are you doing? You won't be a famous captain if you meet Klingons. And he's like, well, maybe I will be. It was good. Strangers from the Sky is also movie era. Interesting. Sort of some odd flashback time travel stuff going on in that one too. Q and Law is my one and only Next Generation book. Deanna Troy's mother, Loxana Troy, meets Q. Chaos ensues, as you might imagine. The Lives of Dax then is another series of short stories. Each story is about one of Dax's hosts from Deep Space Nine. Very good. There is a McCoy cameo as well. But mostly it was in it for the Deep Space characters. So there you have it. There is my complete collection. A few more up there as well. Those are classic Trek too, though. Pretty much full shelf. I like stories that have some good adventure in them. I like it if Spock and McCoy snipe at each other. And like I said, it's got to have all three of them or it doesn't really count. So thanks for watching. Throw a comment in if you have a favorite Star Trek book that you'd recommend. And hey, maybe I'll buy it, and definitely need to move on to a second shelf then.